My name is Teresa Moreno. I'm 67 years old. For most of my life, I've been invisible in other people's stories, even when I was the one holding them together. I raised a son, Caleb, with everything I had. 3 jobs, 2 shifts, and 1 unpaid mortgage just to make sure he had what I never did. Choices. And now, I sit here, across the restaurant patio of the Santa Aurora Resort, watching him celebrate a life I apparently no longer belong in. He doesn't know. He doesn't know that I am not just a woman having dinner alone. He doesn't know that I am not just the gray shadow in his background. He doesn't know I own this entire place. From the corner of my table, I see Caleb raise his glass. His wife, Vanessa, leans in to kiss his cheek. Laughter spills between them like wine. I should leave, but I don't. Not tonight. The waiter approaches. "Would you like another tea, Madame Teresa?" I nod gently. He sets it down with the kind of warmth you only earn after years of shared quiet. And then I see it. Vanessa's eyes have locked on me. A flash of irritation flickers across her perfect face. She whispers something to Caleb. His smile drops. A second later, their waiter is summoned. Not discreetly. With the sharp snap of entitlement I know too well. She's pointing. To me. To me. I sip my tea. Then I see Raphael, the floor manager, rush over. A man of good sense and better manners. He listens to Vanessa's hushed words, gives a slow blink, and straightens. She's still gesturing toward me, hissing something about inappropriate. Dressed like a local and ruining the vibe. I don't need to hear to understand. Raphael turns, walks to me, bows slightly, and then... "Madame Teresa," he says, loud enough for Caleb's table to hear. "As the owner of Santa Aurora, would you like us to offer them dessert on the house for the disturbance?" Silence. A clean, hard silence settles over the clink of wine glasses and seagulls overhead. Vanessa freezes. Caleb looks like someone just pulled the ground from under him. He opens his mouth, closes it. I stand. Slowly. I walk over to their table. Their perfect table for 2. I look my son in the eye. Funny, isn't it? Just yesterday you said I wasn't luxury enough to join you on this trip. And now here we are. You're dining in my house. He says nothing. I give Vanessa a small smile. I built this place with hands that scrubbed other people's toilets. You think I don't belong? I leave them with that. I turn, and in my mind I whisper, not loud but sharp as glass. He played himself, not me. Some people learn their lessons in schools, some at 5-star dinners, and some only see your worth when you no longer beg them to. If you've ever been underestimated, stay with me. This story is for you. I wasn't always strong. In fact, there was a time I was nothing but bone-tired, heartbroken, and soaked to the skin. I was 39, a single mother. And that night, I stood outside a padlocked apartment door, holding nothing but a garbage bag of clothes and a rolled-up blanket. Rain poured in steady sheets, my boots squelched with every step. Behind me, my son Caleb, just 14, hugged his jacket tight, eyes wide and frightened. "Mom, where do we go now?" I couldn't answer. I just placed a hand on his damp curls and whispered, "We'll figure it out." But I didn't know. That eviction wasn't our first. It wouldn't be our last. I was always 2 paychecks behind, 1 emergency away from collapse. We spent that night in the corner booth of a 24-hour diner. I bought 1 cup of tea to share between us so they wouldn't kick us out. Caleb slept with his head on my lap. I stayed awake, watching the rain streak down the glass, timing my hope with the flickering of a broken fluorescent light. Life didn't hand me options. I cleaned houses in the morning. I served tables in the afternoon. I bathed strangers in hospice at night. 3 jobs, 3 uniforms, 3 different pairs of shoes in a duffel bag I never unpacked. I'd nap on buses, change in gas station bathrooms, stitch the holes in my soles with dental floss. Sometimes I felt like I was disappearing, like I was just a pair of hands, not a person. There's this image I'll never forget. It's 2 a.m. I'm scrubbing the tiled floor of a hotel restroom. The world smells like bleach and despair. My back aches. There's blood on my knuckles from overwork. I catch my reflection in the mirror above the sink. Eyes hollow, cheeks sharp, a face I don't recognize. I look older than I should. But then, Caleb's voice echoes in my memory. If I ever make it, Mom, I'll buy you a house. He was 10 when he said that. Drawing it with crayons, a white house with blue shutters and a red door. I taped it to the inside of my locker at the restaurant. That night in the restroom, I smiled through the pain. Because I wasn't cleaning toilets for pride. I was cleaning them for possibility. Every night before school, I would press Caleb's uniform, pack his lunch, and leave sticky notes on the fridge. Eat your breakfast. Be kind. Mom loves you always. He thought I had everything under control. He never saw me cry. I made sure of that. When we finally got a small studio to rent, a tiny box with peeling paint and no hot water, I told him it was temporary. I said one day we'd have a home that smelled like fresh bread, where no one could kick us out. He believed me. So I believe me too. He studied hard. I watched him grow into someone I was proud of. He was smart, charming, and kind, at least to others. At 18, he got into college. I cried in the bathroom stall at work when the acceptance letter came in the mail. I didn't have the money, but I told him, "Go. I'll handle it." So I took a fourth job. Overnight cleaning at the airport. I'd watch flights take off while wiping down chairs. I'd imagine him on one of those planes one day. Successful, free. I missed his orientation, missed his first recital, missed too many things. But I never missed a tuition payment. I gave him everything I had and everything I was. But somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing me as a woman who gave her life for him and started seeing me as someone too worn to be proud of. That broke something inside me, not in a loud way, not like a plate smashing, but like a whisper fading, until it was no longer heard. I wasn't always strong, but pain has a way of shaping steel, and when life stripped me down to nothing, I stitched myself back together in silence. One stitch, one sacrifice, one buried heartbreak at a time. The day Caleb married Vanessa, I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't emotional, not because I didn't feel left behind, but because I had already grown used to disappearing. Instead, I sat there, my hands clasped in my lap, watching a ceremony that looked like it had been plucked straight from a magazine. White chairs, cascading flowers, a string quartet playing Vivaldi. Vanessa looked radiant, I'll give her that. A polished vision in ivory silk. Caleb, my son, stood beside her, looking proud and happy, like the little boy I raised had finally become the man he always dreamed of being. But I couldn't help asking myself, would my own mother have been invited into the wedding photos? Because I wasn't. No one told me I couldn't be in the pictures, but no one asked me to join either. Instead, I watched them pose beneath the arch trellis. Vanessa's parents smiling, her siblings laughing, the photographer guiding everyone gently into place. I stood off to the side near the catering table. I wore a navy blue dress I bought secondhand. My shoes pinched my toes, but I wore them anyway. A waiter passed by and handed me a glass of water. "Here you go, ma'am. Please bring this to table 3. He thought I worked there. I nodded politely. I didn't correct him. I handed the glass to the guest at table 3 and quietly sat back down. Vanessa never liked me. She never said it aloud. She didn't have to. It was in the way she avoided eye contact, the way she called me Teresa instead of Mom, the way she never visited our old apartment while Caleb was still in school, and never asked about my health or how I was getting by. She was educated, well-spoken, ambitious. She came from a family that took summer trips to Europe and debated politics over dinner. I came from sweat-stained uniforms and thrift store casseroles. I wasn't embarrassed by my past, but to her, it was something to overlook, to politely ignore. And Caleb, he started doing the same. It began slowly, the way most exclusions do. I was still invited to birthdays, holidays, little gatherings, but only the ones that didn't involve photos. Christmas brunch? Yes. Family Christmas card shoot? Number. They bought a new house. I offered to help clean it before move-in. Vanessa thanked me but declined. When I visited, I noticed something odd. There was no guest room. I never said anything. But deep down, I knew what that meant. There was no space for me, not even in theory. The thing about being excluded isn't always about being shouted at or insulted. Sometimes it's just being unseen, unacknowledged, untouched, uninvited. At the wedding, I sat at the last table, next to a distant cousin and someone from Vanessa's office I'd never met. They didn't even serve fish at our table, just dry chicken. Vanessa danced with her father, then her mother, then her sister. When Caleb took the microphone to thank his family, he said, "To my amazing new parents who welcomed me like a son, and to my beautiful wife who makes everything better." Nothing about me, not one word. And I sat there smiling, clapping, holding in the ache, because I didn't want to make a scene, because I didn't want to ruin their day, because I'd raised Caleb to shine, not to look back. But it still hurt. It still felt like I had spent years building a house, only to be locked out of it. I remember sneaking out early. No one noticed. Outside, I stood under the canopy of twinkle lights near the valet. A gentle breeze rustled my dress. The moon was full, and I whispered to myself, maybe I was never meant to be in the frame. But something inside me shifted that night. It was the first time I saw the truth clearly. That love, when taken for granted, becomes invisibility. And invisibility has a cost. I first heard about the trip from my neighbor Gloria. She was walking her little terrier past my porch one morning and said with a smile, "I heard Caleb and Vanessa are going on some big anniversary getaway." 10 years already. Can you believe it? I nodded politely, masking my surprise. 10 years? Had it really been that long? I hadn't received a call. No mention of it at our last Sunday dinner. Caleb had talked about work stress. Vanessa had scrolled through her phone between bites of salad. Nothing about a trip. But maybe it was a surprise. Maybe they were still planning. Still, something inside me stirred. Hope. That fragile, dangerous thing. A week later, it arrived. Not a formal card, not a phone call. Just a text. Short. Casual. Like it wasn't supposed to hurt. "Hey, Mom. Just wanted to let you know Vanessa and I are doing a 10-year anniversary trip next month. Nothing major, just a little escape. It's kind of upscale, so we figured it's best you stay back and rest. Don't be upset, okay? You deserve to relax at home. I reread it 5 times. My thumb hovered over the reply box, but I didn't type anything. Instead, I just stared at the message. Let it settle. Let it sting. It wasn't the words. It was what they didn't say. No, we wish you could come. No, let's plan something after. No, you've earned this. With us, just a gentle brush-off wrapped in a soft emoji, a modern way to say, you don't belong in this part of our lives. They'd booked something a little upscale, and somehow I wasn't part of that world. I sat at the edge of my bed, the message still open. The clock ticked quietly in the background. The light through the blinds painted pale stripes across the floor, and somewhere deep inside my chest, I felt something shift. A tiny shard of glass, turning, cracking. It didn't shatter. Not yet. But it moved. That's how it starts. Not with an explosion, but with a tilt. I didn't cry. I didn't call to ask why. I simply turned off my phone and folded the laundry in silence. But my mind replayed things. The birthday brunch where they forgot to pick me up. The Thanksgiving where they brought their own dishes because Mom's food is too heavy. The Mother's Day card signed only by Caleb, never by Vanessa. So many little exclusions. So many small reminders that I wasn't part of the picture. I thought about all the vacations we never took. When Caleb was young, we never went anywhere. We couldn't afford to. Our getaways were blanket forts in the living room. Library day passes, picnics made from leftovers. I once saved up for 3 months just to take him to a cheap water park. He was 9. I still remember how his face lit up when we entered. Back then, he clutched my hand everywhere we went. Back then, I was his whole world. And now, I wasn't even worth a plane ticket. They didn't need me to come. That's fine. But to tell me not to feel bad, that's what hurt the most, as if they already knew, as if they knew it would sting, but sent it anyway. That kind of consideration without kindness, it leaves bruises you can't explain. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of lukewarm tea. My eyes followed the stars. The wind rustled the trees like whispers I couldn't quite hear. I whispered back to the dark, maybe it's time to stop waiting to be included, because being left out was painful. But being quiet about it, that was worse. I arrived at Santa Aurora just past noon, wearing a plain cardigan and carrying a single suitcase. The sun was warm but not cruel, and the breeze that rolled in from the sea carried a sweetness I hadn't tasted in years. Hibiscus and salt and something that felt a little like freedom. A young man in a crisp linen shirt opened the car door. "Welcome back, Madame Teresa," he said with a respectful bow. I nodded softly. "Thank you, Raphael." He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer champagne or a cold towel like he would for the other luxury guests. He simply took my luggage and led me down the stone path, past the grand suites and infinity pools, all the way to a modest bungalow nestled beside the butterfly garden, Unit 8, exactly where I asked for. I chose it not because it was expensive. In fact, it was one of the simplest accommodations on the property. But I remembered it. This was the bungalow where I first stayed when I visited Santa Aurora 30 years ago. Back when I had nothing but grief and a little hope. Back when I was newly widowed. Back when I was just a cleaning lady who had borrowed money to take a bus to the coast, because I needed to breathe somewhere that didn't smell like bleach. I'd fallen in love with the place then, not because of its grandeur, but because it felt like the kind of peace I never thought I could afford. I remember sitting on the wooden bench by the butterfly garden, watching the blue morphos float through the air, as if the universe was reminding me that transformation didn't have to be loud. That same afternoon, I met Mrs. Karina Delgado, one of the original co-founders of the resort. She noticed I was alone. She asked me about my life, and instead of pitying me, she said something I never forgot. Sometimes the women who carry the most weight wear the quietest shoes. She invited me back the next year, told me about a small round of private investment opportunities. I didn't have much, but I said yes. The flash of a memory hits me. My trembling hand signing the paperwork under the guidance of a kind-eyed attorney, the quiet whisper of pen on paper, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, I had finally bought myself a seat at the table. Years later, when I had enough saved, I transferred part of that investment into ownership. Discreet, silent, held in trust. I never told Caleb, never told anyone. Santa Aurora became the one thing in my life that was mine and only mine. No one could take it. No one could dismiss me there. And I never used it, never called in favors, never demanded privileges. Until now. I stepped into the bungalow. The room was simple, with wooden shutters and cream linen curtains that danced in the breeze. On the nightstand sat a fresh orchid and a folded welcome letter. "We're honored by your return, Madame Teresa. As always, your presence is a blessing." I sat on the edge of the bed, ran my fingers across the hand-woven blanket, and exhaled. Not the kind of breath you take every day, but the kind that says, I made it back. I didn't come to Santa Aurora to prove a point. I came because I needed to remember the woman I used to be before I shrank myself to fit into everyone else's lives. Here I wasn't just a mother, or a burden, or an afterthought. Here I was Teresa, a woman who survived, a woman who invested in herself, a woman who belonged, even if no one else saw it. I walked out to the garden that evening. The butterflies were still there, blue, gentle, unapologetically beautiful. One landed near my shoulder, and I whispered, "You remember me, don't you?" No one knew I had arrived yet. I asked the staff not to announce me. I didn't want champagne receptions, didn't want welcome parties, didn't want to parade my name. All I wanted was to sit at that quiet table by the sea, and for once in my life taste something I had built with my own 2 hands, not to show off, not to win, but to exist, fully, unapologetically. "Grandma?" The voice was barely above a whisper, soft and uncertain, like a question asked in a dream. I turned, heart thudding in my chest, and there she was, Emmy, my granddaughter, Caleb's little girl, 11 years old, wild curls framing her face, a paintbrush always behind her ear. She stood in the narrow path between the butterfly garden and the main dining hall, barefoot, clutching a sketch pad to her chest, her eyes wide with disbelief. I blinked. "Emmy?" She didn't hesitate. She ran straight into my arms the way children do when they're too young to know how to hide their joy. Her tiny arms wrapped around my waist, and I knelt down in the grass, holding her like I used to when she was still small enough to fit in my lap. "I thought you weren't coming," she whispered. "Daddy said it was just them and the fancy guests." "No grandparents," I smiled. "Let's keep it our little secret, Just you and me. We'll have our own world here. Quiet, beautiful, no rules." She pulled back and grinned. "Like a secret mission?" I nodded. "Exactly." I led her to my bungalow. She tiptoed like a spy, laughing quietly at the idea of being undercover. "This place is way nicer than the room we're in," she whispered. "Yours smells like flowers." That made me chuckle. I poured her a glass of mango juice and sliced up some fruit from the welcome basket. She flopped onto the bed and began flipping through her sketch pad, showing me half-finished drawings of waves, palm trees, and odd little portraits of waiters and tourists. "I like drawing people who don't notice me," she said. "They're more real that way." Something in my chest ached. "You always notice everything, don't you, Em?" She looked up, suddenly serious. "I notice when you're not around." We made a pact that day to meet every afternoon at the edge of the butterfly garden, to keep my presence a secret from Caleb and Vanessa, to build a little haven where she didn't have to walk on eggshells. She brought me seashells from the beach and stories from the dinner table. I taught her how to press flowers between pages, how to listen for crickets when the sun dipped low. One night she asked, "Grandma, why don't they let you come on trips like this?" I could have said 1,000 things, but I only answered, "Sometimes grown-ups forget who loved them first." She didn't reply. She just leaned her head on my shoulder, quiet as the dusk. At dinner that evening, I watched from afar. I always took my meals outside, away from the main hall. But Emmy sat inside, across the long table from her parents, swinging her legs beneath the linen. Halfway through dessert, she dropped something, a folded napkin, neatly creased. I saw her glance around nervously, then slide it under her plate. Later that night, when I walked her back to her room through the garden path, she handed it to me in secret. "Open it when you're alone," she whispered. I sat on my bungalow's porch under the soft flicker of a lantern. The waves whispered in the distance. I unfolded the napkin carefully. Inside was a sketch. Me, sitting beneath the bougainvillea. Butterflies dancing around my shoulders, a gentle smile on my face, lines around my eyes that she hadn't erased, a crown of wildflowers above my head. She had drawn me the way she saw me, not as a forgotten old woman, but as something soft and strong. At the bottom, she'd written, "My real queen." I stared at the drawing for a long time. Tears came quietly, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming truth that this little girl, this intuitive, brilliant child, saw me more clearly than my own son did. And that was enough. More than enough. The first time Caleb walked past me at the resort, he didn't even flinch. Not a glance. Not a second look. Just the breeze of his tailored linen shirt brushing the air as he hurried to the bar. I was sitting near the orchid pond, where the tiles met in a mosaic I had helped design decades ago. My hair was pulled into a low bun, sunglasses on, wearing a soft linen dress that melted into the stone bench beneath me. He didn't recognize me, and I didn't stop him. Instead, I watched him laugh at something Vanessa whispered. Her voice carried louder than she thought. "Does your mother even know how expensive this place is?" she said, scoffing. "One night here costs more than she probably made in a month." Caleb chuckled, nervous, dismissive. She wouldn't get it. This isn't her world. He wasn't wrong. It wasn't my world. It was a world I built and left behind. I stood up and walked along the stone pathway, each step clicking gently beneath my sandals. The same stones I once helped haul up from the quarry. 30 years ago, I had worked behind the scenes of this resort's early days, when it was still a dream sketched out on fragile blueprints. I remembered the heat of that summer, how my back ached from lifting crates, how I learned the name of every tree planted, every shade of tile chosen. I didn't do it because I had to. I did it because it was the first thing I chose for myself. After years of bending to a husband's moods, a son's needs, and the weight of unpaid bills, Santa Aurora had been my quiet rebellion. I passed by a young couple taking selfies in front of the butterfly garden. They smiled, posed, and moved on. They didn't know that the ivy on the trellis had been chosen by me, that I'd insisted on native plants, that every corner of this place held my fingerprint. No one knew, and strangely, I liked it that way. Later that afternoon, I stood by the juice bar ordering a hibiscus cooler. Caleb and Vanessa were 3 feet away. Vanessa's heels clicked impatiently. Honestly, I thought this place would be less rustic. Too many old people hanging around Caleb looked over at me briefly, then away again. No spark of recognition. "I told you we should have gone to Santorini," he muttered. "This resort's old money. It's probably owned by some retired heiress who's never even been here." I smiled at the bartender, who handed me my drink with both hands. "For you, Madame Teresa." "Always a pleasure," Vanessa blinked. Caleb didn't notice. That evening, I walked alone through the moonlit garden trails. I touched the vine-covered walls, sat on the stone bench under the fig tree, listened to the same wind that had once carried the sound of my hammering when we were laying the wooden beams on the spa pavilion. And I remembered everything. There's something about being invisible that's freeing. When people don't see you, you see everything. You hear how your son speaks when he thinks you're nowhere near. You watch how he lets his wife shape every word that leaves his mouth. You feel the ache of absence without needing to explain it. But there, among the walls I helped build, I felt stronger. Not bitter, not spiteful. Just still. A witness. I stood outside the main lounge and saw them again, laughing with other guests, swirling wine, bragging about careers and renovations and summer camps. Vanessa's laugh echoed like a bell. Caleb looked at her like she was the sun. And maybe she was, for him. But once, I was the sun too, before I was expected to dim myself so he could shine. And now, I didn't want my light back. I had my own moonrise. So I turned, walked back to my bungalow without a word, and as I closed the door behind me, I whispered to myself, "They look at me like a stranger. But this entire place knows who I am." That evening, I dressed with quiet care. a soft navy dress, the color of nightfall over the sea, a simple necklace my mother once gave me, rose gold with a single opal, and in my hair, a white jasmine pin tucked just above my ear. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wasn't dressing for them. I was dressing for me. I stepped out just as the sun kissed the water for the last time that day. The horizon turned molten gold. Every breath carried salt and hibiscus. Santa Aurora looked exactly as I dreamed it would. All those years ago, when I first dared to imagine I could build something that would last longer than my exhaustion. The restaurant perched over the shoreline, lit by soft lanterns, each table flickering in candlelight. The sea hummed below like a memory. I saw them immediately, Caleb and Vanessa, seated near the terrace railing. It was their 10-year anniversary dinner. They were dressed to impress. Vanessa in a shimmering champagne gown, Caleb in his finest beige blazer. Everything about them screamed curated perfection. I moved toward my reserved table, a quiet corner by the stone balustrade, where the sea breeze found its way through the palms. I had reserved it hours earlier under my name. Not Miss, not Mrs., just owner. I sat down. The server placed a linen napkin on my lap and poured a glass of water with a lemon wedge. A soft voice called, "Madame Teresa, may I bring your usual dessert tonight? Lavender creme brulee?" I smiled and nodded, and just then Caleb noticed me, his brows furrowed. Vanessa turned, their expressions twisted in unison, confusion, discomfort, displeasure. Vanessa leaned in toward their server and whispered something. The manager was called. A tall man in a crisp suit approached my table gently. I knew what was coming. I'd lived enough years to read lips and read moods. Vanessa had likely said, "Please escort that woman away. She's distracting, and we're paying for a peaceful night." But the manager smiled warmly at me instead, turned to them, and said the words I'd waited decades to hear. "Madame Teresa is the owner of this resort." The silence that followed felt like thunder underwater. Vanessa blinked rapidly. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Caleb stared at me as if I were a ghost. I stood slowly, quietly, walked over to their table, placed one hand on the back of a chair. "Yesterday," I said, "you told me I wasn't quite fit for this trip, that I wouldn't blend in. Today, I am not the woman behind your seat. I'm the woman who built the floor beneath it." Caleb looked as though he'd been struck. His eyes searched my face for something familiar, but what he saw was not the tired mother who used to scrub toilets and bring him hot soup at midnight. He saw someone he didn't know how to understand. Vanessa's lips curled, defensive now. "You've been spying on us?" she hissed, voice just above a whisper. "No," I said. "I've been here the whole time. You just never looked closely enough." There was a beat of silence. Then a small hand reached up from beside me. Emmy, sweet Emmy, had been sitting at a nearby table with a book and crayons. She tugged my sleeve, then shyly slipped something into my hand, a folded napkin. When I opened it, I nearly forgot to breathe. She had drawn me, sitting on a throne made of jasmine and stone, with a crown of flowers atop my head. In the background, soft waves and butterflies. She'd written one word at the bottom, in uneven, wobbly handwriting. Queen. My eyes watered, but not from pain, from recognition. This child, this little soul saw me, not through titles, not through money, but through love. I bent down and whispered in her ear, "Thank you, darling. That's the most precious gift I've received in years." Emmy giggled and hugged me around the waist. Then she looked up at her parents. "Why didn't you tell me Grandma owns the resort?" Vanessa looked away. Caleb exhaled, defeated. I turned, back to my table, sat down, picked up my fork, and when dessert arrived, I cracked the caramel top of my creme brulee with a quiet smile. I didn't come here to flaunt anything, I thought to myself. I just wanted to see if the life I built still remembered me. Turns out it did, even if my own son did not. The night was gentle, but the wind carried a quiet tension. I sat alone on the small veranda of my bungalow, a shawl draped around my shoulders. The garden was asleep, the butterflies long tucked into leaves, the scent of plumeria soft in the air. I sipped warm chamomile, the mug cupped in both hands. Silence suited me, but then a knock. Hesitant, not loud. 3 taps. Then stillness. I didn't move at first, then came the voice. "Mom, it's me." I opened the door. Caleb stood there, awkward, eyes red-rimmed, hands shoved in the pockets of a jacket he didn't need in this climate. We just looked at each other for a moment, then I stepped aside. He sat down on the small cushioned chair across from mine. Not a word. He didn't know how to start, but I did. I reached into a woven box near my nightstand and pulled out a photo. It was old, wrinkled at the corners with a water stain on the left edge. I handed it to him. He looked down and stilled. It was me, at 39, hair soaked from rain clinging to my face, a garbage bag in one hand, a choked expression on my face. Behind me, a rusted metal gate, a sign that read, "Tenants must vacate." And in the far corner, a 14-year-old boy, thin, scared. Him. Caleb blinked rapidly. He traced the edges of the photo with his thumb. "I haven't seen this in years," he said, voice barely audible. I nodded. "That night," I began, "I promised myself something. I said, one day I will own a place no one can throw me out of, a place that's mine, that no one can lock me out of." He stared at the photo. Still no words. "And now," I continued, "I do. I have that place. This place. Santa Aurora." I looked him square in the eyes, but somehow my own son still found a way to make me feel unwelcome in it. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, dense, like fog you could drown in. Caleb opened his mouth, then closed it. His jaw tensed. I didn't mean to. Vanessa thought it would be weird. "To bring your mother to a luxury resort," I finished for him. He looked down. "She said, you might feel out of place." "I do feel out of place," I said, not harshly, but not because of the place. I leaned back, watching the night sky. The stars were bright tonight, almost too bright. "You know what hurts more than being forgotten, Caleb? Being remembered only when it's convenient." He flinched at that. "I scrubbed floors for 20 years so you could go to college," I said, the words calm, steady. "I skipped dinners to afford your textbooks. I wore cracked shoes so you could wear polished ones. And now, when I finally have a seat at the table, you don't want me there." He ran a hand over his face. "I didn't mean to shut you out." "Intentions don't shelter people," I replied. "Actions do." For a long while, neither of us spoke. The waves crashed gently in the distance, a rhythm older than our grief. Then I stood, walked over to him, placed a hand on his shoulder, not with anger, but with a weight that came from years of loving too deeply without asking for anything in return. "I'm not asking for thanks," I said. "I'm not even asking for space in your life. I just wanted you to remember who I am. Not just what I did." He nodded, almost imperceptibly. "I do remember," he whispered. But the truth was, he was only just starting to. I took back the photo from his hands and slid it into my pocket. "You should go," I said softly. "Yeah." He stood. But before he walked away, he paused. "Mom, do you hate me?" I looked at him. Really looked. "No," I said, "but I won't shrink to make you comfortable anymore." He swallowed hard, then walked away into the night. No tears fell. But inside, something shifted. Not broken, not healed, just named. Sometimes The deepest grief doesn't make a sound. It just sits quietly on your chest, like the weight of a love that wanted to be enough. The morning after my conversation with Caleb, I chose to sit on the shaded terrace outside the breakfast lounge. Alone, again. I wasn't hiding. I just didn't feel like watching another round of performative affection from the golden couple. But fate, or something like it, had other plans. Mind if I join you? The voice startled me, not because it was unfamiliar, but because it was unexpected. Lorna, Vanessa's mother, always elegant, always poised, the kind of woman whose perfume trailed behind her like a legacy. She sat without waiting for my reply. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she placed her silk clutch gently on the table and stirred a cup of Earl Grey that she hadn't yet sipped. "You know," she said finally, "I've always wondered what kind of woman raises a man like Caleb." I didn't respond. I didn't know what she meant by that. Not yet. She looked out toward the pool where Caleb and Vanessa were laughing with guests, putting on their usual show. "My daughter thinks silence is weakness," she said. "That gentleness can't coexist with strength." She turned back to me. Her gaze, for once, wasn't sharp. It was almost tired. "But I watched you last night. And I saw something I haven't seen in a long, long time. I let the breeze answer for me. I've lived a long time in rooms filled with important people," she continued, "and I've built a life filled with the best of everything. Homes, jewelry, the most exclusive schools for Vanessa, but none of it," she paused, "not a single thing, has earned me the look your granddaughter gave you last night." That stopped me. My breath caught a little, because Emmy's look, soft, radiant, proud, was the only thing that didn't shake when the world did. Lorna leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Do you know what Emmy did after dinner?" I shook my head. "She came to my suite. She walked straight in, holding that drawing of you with the little flower crown, and said, 'This is my grandma. She's a queen, but she doesn't need a castle.'" My eyes prickled. "And for a moment," Lorna whispered, "I saw the kind of legacy I've never built." We sat in silence, two women who had walked different paths, ending up at the same bench of regret. Then slowly she reached for the soft silk scarf she always wore, powder blue, hand-stitched initials at the corner. She took it off, folded it carefully, and placed it on the chair between us. "This was a gift from my own mother," she said. "I've worn it for 40 years, through marriage, funerals, boardrooms, through all the masks I've worn to look powerful. But last night, Teresa, I realized something. It's not the scarf that gave me presence. It was the illusion." She stood up. "You don't need illusions. You have love. And that, my dear, is rarer than wealth." She didn't wait for my response, just walked away, back straight, hair immaculate, but her steps slower. And as I looked at the empty chair beside me with the scarf neatly left behind, I felt something loosen inside my chest. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but maybe, just maybe, recognition. And in that moment, I understood. Some women wear crowns of gold, others wear silence like armor, and sometimes a silk scarf placed on a chair can speak louder than 1,000 apologies. The sun was sinking, casting a honey-colored glow over the terrace. Somewhere near the garden, I could hear the faint sound of glasses clinking and the rhythm of an upbeat song floating from the resort's outdoor BBQ. The so-called celebration was in full swing, but I wasn't there. And I wasn't expected. Of course not. Instead, I sat in my bungalow quietly sipping lukewarm tea, listening to the hum of the fan and the soft rustling of palm leaves outside my window. Then, 3 soft knocks, a pause, then 2 more. I stood, opened the door, and there she was, my Emmy. Barefoot, cheeks flushed, eyes puffy and red. Her party dress was wrinkled. There was a faint smear of watermelon on her collar, and she was holding her favorite sketchbook like a shield against the world. "Grandma," she whispered. Then the dam broke. She threw herself into my arms, her tiny body trembling against mine. I held her tight, letting her cry until the hiccups took over. We sank onto the edge of my bed. I left the party," she said between breaths. "I didn't want to be there." Anymore, I smoothed her hair, tucking a loose curl behind her ear. "Why, sweetheart?" I asked gently. Her little fists clenched. "Because Mommy said I shouldn't talk to you so much anymore. She said you're acting dramatic and that I need to focus on being with the family." I kept my face calm, though something sharp twisted inside my chest. She said, Emmy paused, looking down. "She said you're not really part of our side of the family anymore." For a moment, all I could hear was the ticking of the small brass clock on the nightstand. And then, softly, I asked, "And what did you say to her?" Emmy looked up at me with those wide, soulful eyes that saw more than they should for 10 years old. "I told her," she hesitated, voice cracking, "if Grandma doesn't get to be part of this family, then I don't want to be either." Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I just squeezed her hand. She reached into her bag and pulled out her colored pencils, then her sketchbook. "Sit with me?" she asked. We settled onto the floor, back against the bed frame, just like we used to when she was little, when I'd babysit while her parents went out for grown-up dinners. She opened to a blank page and began to draw, her small fingers sure and steady. I watched as she sketched the bungalow garden, our little hideaway, then added 2 figures sitting on a bench under the bougainvillea. One had short gray curls and a straw hat. The other wore a pink sundress and had curly hair that looked a lot like hers. Beneath it, in block letters, she wrote, "This is our place." Something inside me cracked open, not from anger, not from grief, but from the realization that I didn't need validation from the table I was no longer invited to. I had already built a table of my own, right here, with the one person who truly saw me. "Emmy," I said quietly, "you know I'll always be here for you, right?" She nodded, still focused on the drawing. "And I'll always come find you, even if they say not to." A small smile tugged at my lips. "You're very brave." "No," she said, looking up. "I'm just not scared when I'm with you." We sat like that for a long time, coloring, whispering stories, letting the world outside fade into nothing. No performance, no curated photos, no permission needed to exist. Just the sound of a little girl reclaiming her truth, and a grandmother learning that sometimes love finds its way back through the smallest of voices. By the time the moon replaced the sun, Emmy had fallen asleep on the bed, her hand still resting on the page she had drawn. I tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "No one can erase what we've built. Because some families are drawn in ink and blood, but others are made in crayon and kindness. And those are the ones that last forever." The morning sun filtered through the high glass. Panels of the Santa Aurora Conference Hall. Clean, sharp light bounced off every polished surface. Mahogany table, chrome water pitchers, freshly printed investment documents. I wasn't on the guest list, but I didn't need to be. I stood quietly at the door for a moment, watching the scene unfold. At the head of the table, Caleb was speaking in confident tones I didn't recognize anymore. Next to him, Vanessa nodded, arms crossed, wearing her usual power lipstick and heels too high for a resort. Across from them sat 2 men in tailored suits, investors from Singapore, judging by their accents and posture. My resort manager stood nearby, nervously shifting weight from one foot to another. I caught snippets. "We believe acquiring a majority stake in Santa Aurora will allow our chain to diversify. The current structure lacks expansion agility. We assume it won't be difficult to secure board approval." That's when the lead investor asked, clearly but calmly, "Caleb, are you absolutely certain your mother isn't a conflict of interest in this deal? We've learned she might hold Significant shares. My son laughed, brushing it off with a wave of his hand. My mother? No, she doesn't even understand how these things work. She's retired, detached. I'll handle the signatures. At that moment, I stepped inside. The room quieted like someone had turned off the sound. I didn't speak right away. I placed my palm on the leather folder in front of the lawyer seated at the corner. He stood. So did the resort's general counsel. The investor glanced at me, puzzled. The manager nodded, then cleared his throat. Gentlemen, allow me to formally introduce Madame Teresa, the majority shareholder of Santa Aurora. I saw Caleb's smile vanish. Vanessa's jaw clenched. The lead investor blinked. You're the majority? I nodded once, calm, steady. Yes, 60%, held quietly under a blind trust for 30 years. My eyes never left Caleb. I built this resort with my husband's life insurance and my tips from waitressing. When others took vacations, I took double shifts. I bought every percent in silence, and I kept it that way until now. Caleb looked down at the documents, then back at me. You knew about this meeting? He whispered, voice thin. I authorized the scheduling system, Caleb. Every boardroom booking crosses my desk. Vanessa stood. This is a betrayal. I turned to her gently. No, Vanessa. A betrayal is leaving your mother-in-law off your family tree while trying to profit from her silence. Then I turned to the investors. I've reviewed the proposal, and I've made my decision as majority owner. The lawyer beside me slid the final page across the table, unsigned. Santa Aurora declines the offer. The room fell into stunned silence. No raised voices, no dramatics, just the crisp sound of a deal dying mid-breath. Caleb sank into his chair, pale. Why would you do this? He asked. I took a breath, then spoke quietly. Because I'm no longer the woman who scrubs toilets and begs for a space at her own son's table. I gave you life. I gave you choices. I gave you my silence. I stepped closer, picked up the pen from the center of the table, and placed it down. But this time, I don't sign. I don't enable. I don't disappear. Vanessa looked like she wanted to scream. Caleb didn't speak again. And I smiled, not out of cruelty, but out of peace. For the first time in decades, my voice held weight. My presence took space, and my boundaries were no longer negotiable. The investors respectfully gathered their documents and stood. One of them offered me a subtle nod of admiration. Wise decision, Madame Teresa. It's rare to see legacy guarded with such clarity. As the room emptied, I remained behind for a moment, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows onto the infinity pool, glimmering like the years I'd held back. They thought I was just a relic, a footnote. But I was the foundation, and now I was the firewall too. The sky was beginning to soften, shifting from blazing gold to pale rose. I sat on the flat edge of the old stone bluff that curved above the ocean, my favorite spot since the resort's earliest days. Back then, it was just a hill with wind and wildflowers. No benches, no cameras, just sky, salt, and silence. The hush of the tide below was steady, calming, like a lullaby whispered to the bones. I heard footsteps crunch the gravel path behind me. I didn't turn. I already knew. Mom? I nodded slightly but said nothing. Caleb stood behind me for a while. I didn't offer to fill the space. For once I let him feel what silence truly carried. After some time, he sat beside me, still not too close, just near enough. I don't even know what to say, he admitted. The sun dipped lower. The line between water and sky blurred. Then his voice softer this time. Why didn't you tell me, Mom? About all of it? The shares, the ownership, the struggle, all these years. Why didn't you say anything? I exhaled slowly. Because it wasn't something I needed you to know, I said. Back then, your belief in me wouldn't have changed the rent. It wouldn't have made my legs less tired after 3 jobs, and it certainly wouldn't have made your wife respect me. I glanced at him. He looked down. I didn't build Santa Aurora to prove anything. I built it so I'd have one place in this world no one could kick me out of. He swallowed. I kept going. You remember that motel we got evicted from? You were 14. You asked me where we would sleep that night, and I said we'd figure it out. I remember, he said, barely audible. Well, I figured it out. I smiled a little, not from pride, but from peace. Every tip I scrubbed off greasy plates, every callus from cleaning bathrooms, I turned it into shares, quietly, patiently. I let others take the credit, but I kept the deed, kept it in a safety box, just mine, just in case the world tried to evict me again. He was crying, I think, but I didn't look. I didn't want him to see that my eyes were dry. I never wanted to humiliate you, I whispered. I only came here to watch the ocean, to be near something I built. I thought I could just exist here, quietly, and you wouldn't even notice. He blinked fast like the wind stung his eyes. But I did notice, didn't I? He muttered. I noticed you, but I still acted like you didn't belong. Like you weren't enough, I tilted my head. No, Caleb. You acted the way you were taught to act, and I let you be taught that way. That's on me, too. He opened his mouth to protest, but I stopped him. I never corrected your wife. Never spoke up when she cut me from wedding photos or when she booked rooms without asking if I wanted to come. I let myself become invisible because I thought being quiet was the same as being kind. The sea curled in again, hushed and infinite. I didn't come here to be angry, I added. I came here because I wanted to be somewhere that remembered me, even if no one else did. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled something out. A worn photo. It was us. Me and him. The day we lost our home. I was standing with dripping hair, a laundry bag on my shoulder, and Caleb clutching my coat. Someone had taken it with a flip phone, back when we had nothing but each other. I kept it, he whispered. I nodded. I kept the land, I whispered back. The sun slipped just beneath the horizon. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Not all pain needs fixing. Some just needs naming and releasing. The morning after the sunset conversation, I awoke to birdsong and the scent of salt and lemongrass drifting through my open window. There was a quietness in my chest, not the hollow kind, but the kind that settles in when something heavy has finally been put down. Emmy came by early, her hair still tousled from sleep, holding a paintbrush in one hand and a small envelope in the other. Her eyes were wide, careful. I was looking for more paper to draw, she said, and I found this inside your old wooden box. I recognized it instantly. The envelope was soft at the edges, slightly yellowed with time. My handwriting was still crisp, though the ink had faded a little. I hadn't seen that letter in over a decade. I didn't open it, she added, but I wanted to ask if I could read it with you. I nodded. We sat together under the canopy outside my bungalow. The air was still cool, kissed by dew. Emmy leaned gently against my side as I unfolded the letter. I began to read aloud, and the words, my words, spilled back like rain through a broken gutter. Dear Caleb, today was your graduation. I wasn't on the list. Vanessa said the seats were limited, and maybe they were. So I stood outside the auditorium right by the side door. I couldn't see much, but I could hear. When they called your name, I closed my eyes and imagined your face. You always wrinkle your nose a little when you're nervous, even when you're smiling. I pictured that. I imagined you walking across the stage in the navy blue suit I saved so hard to buy. 2 days before, I didn't eat. Not because we didn't have food, but because I needed every dollar to make sure you looked like you belonged up there. That suit cost everything I had in my wallet, but it was worth it. You were worth it. I wanted to shout when they said your name, but instead I just clapped, quietly, because I didn't want anyone to turn and ask who I was. They wouldn't have understood. They wouldn't have known that while I wasn't in the audience. I had been there all along. Love, Mom. When I finished, I didn't say anything. Emmy didn't either. She was tracing her small fingers along the edges of the paper like it was something sacred. I didn't know, she whispered, that they didn't let you go. I smiled faintly. Some things aren't about being let in, I said. Some things are about choosing to stay anyway, even if you have to sit outside. She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with a kind of softness far too deep for her age. Later that day, Emmy asked for permission to use the main lobby hall. The central display space had been turned into a small tribute to the resort's founding years, a mix of old photos, hand-drawn blueprints, and oil portraits. At the center was a black and white image of me, 40 years old, in my waitress uniform. I remembered the photographer back then, a visiting journalist documenting women workers in emerging resort towns. I never expected that photo to resurface, let alone be hung here. But Emmy, oh, that child, had something else in mind. She gently placed the letter in a hand-carved wooden frame. Then, without a word, she slid it onto the shelf below the photo. Not above, not beside, but right beneath it, like a root beneath a tree. Next to the frame, she tucked a small note she'd written in her rainbow-colored marker pen. She wasn't just the owner. She was always the heart. I stood a few steps behind, watching her. No one else was in the hall. The midday light spilled through the arched windows, dappling everything in gold. In that quiet moment, I realized the truth. We don't always get our applause when we deserve it. Sometimes it comes years later, in the form of a child who sees you fully, who names your worth out loud, not for the cameras, not for the crowd, but because love recognizes love, and truth doesn't need to shout to be eternal. I didn't announce my departure. No final dinner, no dramatic speech, no waiting for anyone to chase after me. That's not the kind of ending I needed. Instead, I folded my clothes with care, left a handwritten note for Emmy, and placed a small stack of documents in a linen folder on the front desk, addressed to the resort board and legal department. It was a plan I had drafted for years, but never dared to release. Retreat for Forgotten Women. A program fully funded by my shares at Santa Aurora, offering annual restorative stays for women like me, women who had scrubbed floors in silence, raised children without applause, endured abandonment without bitterness, single mothers, elderly widows, caretakers, women whose names were never engraved on plaques, but whose lives carved silent foundations for others to stand on. The brochure read, "This resort wasn't built to impress. It was built to heal. May every guest who arrives feel what I once longed to feel, welcomed, remembered. Home I didn't leave out of pain. I left because staying was no longer necessary to prove my worth. My story had already rooted itself in the stones, the trees, the butterfly garden. Even if they take my name off the title deed someday, my soul will still breathe through every bungalow wall." When I wheeled my small suitcase to the front gate, the driver was already waiting. The morning sun had just begun to kiss the tops of the palms. Everything felt clean and untouched. Then I heard small footsteps. "Grandma!" Emmy came running, barefoot on the path, a sketch pad pressed to her chest. She reached me breathless and clung to my waist. "I knew you were leaving today," she whispered. "I wanted to say goodbye first." I knelt down, brushing her hair away from her face. "You don't need to say goodbye," I told her. "This place belongs to you too now. Not by name, but by heart." She pulled something from her sketch pad. It was a new drawing. Me, standing tall in front of the butterfly garden, my silver hair loose in the wind, surrounded by women of all ages, some old, some young, some in uniforms, some barefoot, but all smiling. At the bottom, she'd written in big purple letters, "Welcome home, Grandma. This is your place, and I'll grow up to make the world like this, too." I pressed my lips to her forehead. No tears, just a fullness in my chest so wide, it felt like breathing for the first time after holding it in for years. She stepped back as the driver opened the door. I climbed into the car. The wind picked up, tousling my hair. I didn't fix it. I let it fly. I didn't look back. Because I wasn't leaving anything behind. I was simply stepping forward. Before we part ways, dear listener, may I ask, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning, coffee in hand, the world still asleep? Or is it the hush of a late night, where stories like mine sit beside you like an old friend? Wherever you are, thank you. Thank you for sitting with me. Thank you for listening. If this story touched your heart, I ask you to consider subscribing, not just for more stories, but to be part of something gentler, a place that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. We read every comment, so let us know. How did this story land in your heart? And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock. It waits quietly until you're ready to open the door. Take care, wherever you are, and we'll see you in the next story.